Hello and welcome to our lip talk through video. In this video, myself and Annie are going to talk you through the complete theory of a lip enhancement via dermal filler injections. We're going to take you right the way through the process. You don't need to worry in terms of it being done on a ball. This is just the theory. We're going to be having lots of videos in future modules of actual lip demonstrations on models themselves, where we're going to be injecting them exactly in the way that we've spoke about in this video here. But it's important to understand exactly what all the different steps are and see them laid out in just a 2D fashion, so it's very easy for you to understand exactly where you're going to inject, exactly how much you're going to inject at each point, and the angles and all of the other information you're going to need to do a successful lip enhancement. So first of all, we'll talk through a couple of different areas on the lip itself that you need to be aware of. So first of all, and the one that all of you will know and be really aware of, is the Cupid's bows. So we have a Cupid's bow obviously here, and we've got another Cupid's bow here. We also, at the edge of the lip here, have something called the oral commissure. So these really are the two main sort of areas of the lip that you're going to really be looking at when you're doing your lip enhancements. The actual lip itself, as we know, is generally pink, or in most situations a different colour to the skin tone, and that area of the lip is called the mucosa. So in like mine and Annie's example, it's a pink instead of being white around the skin, and that is called the mucosa. Now, when we're doing these lip enhancements, what we're always trying to look to do is project the Cupid's bow upwards and also create a nice drop on the bottom lip. According to the law of phi, which is the magic ratio, the bottom lip should be about 1.6 times bigger than the top lip. So if you measure from the peak of the Cupid's bow to the middle line here, and then from the middle line to the bottom of the lip, this distance here should be about 1.6 times bigger than the top lip, which in a lot of cases sounds peculiar because a lot of people's lips are a similar size, and in fact in some different races they are a completely different ratio altogether. So for example, if you have a black client, generally the top lip would be bigger than the bottom lip. But just so you understand what the true phi ratio should be, it's 1.6 to 1. But in almost every situation, especially on a white Caucasian person, and in fact a lot of Asian race as well, you need to make sure that the bottom lip is always at least a little bit bigger than the top lip. If you were to have a customer come in and they've naturally got a much bigger top lip than bottom lip, then you would probably want to go with their natural existing lip shape and ratio.
They'll usually say that to you as well, won't they, at the start of how they like their lip.
Yeah.
They'll always give that information before you've even asked for it.
Yeah, and it is also worth asking them. However, if you have a client that comes in that has had lip enhancement before, and their top lip is bigger than their bottom lip, and they are a white client, you should ask them if their lip was that way before they had them done.
Yeah, that's a great point to make, isn't it? Ask for photos before any filler.
Yeah, because if a white person comes in and their top lip is bigger than their bottom lip and they've had filler, the likelihood is that they've changed it to something that is not natural.
Yeah.
In which case we might look to put that back to a more natural looking ratio, which is a larger bottom lip to a smaller top lip. So with the Cupid's bows, the very peak of the Cupid's bow is called the apex. Now that word is not directly relational to aesthetics or anything like that. It's a general word. People use it in car racing and various other areas. Now the apex is always the peak, but the peak can look slightly different on different lips. On this one here, we've made it extremely obvious what that peak is, but some people's Cupid's bows are a little bit more rounded like this, in which case the apex would still be at the highest point here. And in this case, the apex is right here.
Also, if people have had filler before and they suffer with any migration, sometimes it can be quite difficult to find that apex of the Cupid's bow, can't it?
Yeah, when people have got a lot of migration, sometimes the blur between the mucosa and the white skin can be quite difficult to find. But
especially on a pale person, it's it can be quite difficult.
Yeah, for sure. And in fact, some people don't even have a great difference in skin tone between the two, which is why it's even more important to create definition when you're doing your lip enhancement. But it's very important to be able to always pick out the apex of the Cupid's bow, because like I said right at the very beginning, we're always looking to raise the height of the Cupid's bow. A beautiful lip, in my opinion, obviously it does vary person to person, is that we have a nice high Cupid's bow, a nice drop on the bottom lip, and that this whole central section, if you were to draw it out, would look like a nice big heart-shaped lip. So let's talk about exactly how we're going to do this. When we're doing these injections, it's extremely important to stick to 3 rules. So rule number 1 in terms of safety.
So the first rule would always be to inject in the mucosa or the pink. Okay, so you're always injecting within that area. You're not going to go past the vermilion border and be injecting anywhere into the skin. It's always into the pink.
Perfect. Next rule of safety.
You're also going to be injecting in the dry. So there is a clear definition between the wet and the dry border, and we will show you that on a live model later on in another video. So when you're looking at the lip, the dry, you won't see any vascularity over the lip. However, if you flip the lip and look underneath, in the wet area, it's very vascular, and that's where all of the main arteries will be. We want to avoid that at all costs.
Yeah, that is extremely important. Injecting into the pink area of the lip, the dry area of the lip, and then our last rule, and probably the most important one, is
being superficial.
Yeah, being superficial. And what superficial means, if we have a look at the level of the skin, let's say this is the surface of the skin, and then we've got fat underneath here, and then let's say we've got muscle underneath here. When we mean superficial, we mean staying as high up towards the lower surface of the skin as is possible. We don't want to be injecting, for example, going through the skin and coming all the way down here, because like Annie said, down here, we're typically going to find arteries and things that we just don't want to get to, and also muscle. Mm-hmm. However, if we put our needle in, let's say, for example, we put it in here, and then we just go underneath the surface of the skin itself, that is where we're going to stay safest, and also what is going to give the best result as well. If you imagine the surface of the skin is literally like this, we want our needle to glide directly underneath that surface of that skin, not down into potential arteries or muscle. We want to literally stay directly underneath the dermis itself. Now, something that's really important to understand as well is the actual depth of the artery, the maximum depth that the artery will be, the main artery, is 4 millimeters. So it can actually be anything right up to the surface. In some cases, you will literally see that they've got a tiny little pulsing artery right in the surface of their lip. You would obviously avoid that at all costs. However, in most situations, it is a little bit deeper, but the maximum depth is 4 millimeters. That is not a lot.
No, it's not at all. And when you're doing a lip, before you even think about actually any injections, you should always analyse the area first. Like Adam said, sometimes it's actually visible. So you want to have a look inside the lip, outside the lip, and all around the mouth, especially if they have had dermal fillers done before.
Yeah, and when you can tell that they've had dermal fillers before, or obviously you would have already asked them as part of your consent and various other communication that you would have had, it's important to check that there are no lumps in their lips. If they've got lumps in their lips and then you do it without informing them of the fact that they've got lumps, it's entirely possible they're going to come back and say that you caused those lumps. Yeah. However, if you find them, point them out, show them to them in the mirror maybe, and explain to them that they've come from a previous treatment, they're going to then know that that was done by somebody else. It's really important to point that out to them.
We do that quite a lot, don't we? When you actually talk to your client, and you're not just rushing the treatment, you talk to them, you give them the mirror, you show them the lumps. A lot of the time people don't even realise that they're there, or they think that that's normal, especially if somebody is a virgin to dermal fillers. Let's say if someone's a little bit younger, they think that's completely normal, that's what filler feels like. We hear that quite a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
So to be able to show them, describe to them that that isn't normal, they feel a lot more comfortable under your control and care.
Yeah, definitely. Like we said in earlier videos, the consultation and the aftercare is extremely important. So going back to the actual injecting of the lips itself, There's one last thing that we need to do before we actually start doing the lip, and that is look for symmetry. If they have an asymmetrical lip, i.e. one side is higher than the other or bigger than the other, or there's some form of asymmetry in their lip, we must always correct the asymmetry or the change of size or the difference of sizes before we do anything else. So if, for example, this Cupid's bow was up here and this one was down here, we would always look to bring this one up first and then go through the lip enhancement that Annie and I are about to talk you through, rather than doing that first and trying to correct as you go. If this side of the lip is essentially, plumper than the other side, we will always want to fix the other side to match it first and then go through our standard lip enhancement. That's really important. We can't tell you the exact figures that you would put in or how much you'd put in or where you'd put them, because obviously those asymmetrical differences will be different
from person to person.
Yeah, on every person. But it's always important that you correct first and then do your enhancement straight away after.
And just to highlight on what Adam was saying, it's essential to do that first. You can't do that after you've actually started the injections, because then you're getting into a routine of chasing the swelling.
Yeah.
Because say, for example, if this was my client and I did an injection here, just when I'm actually breaking the skin, my client could then swell up before I've actually even injected any product, because everybody fights any trauma differently. So you would have to do the corrections first before you do anything, just highlighting obviously what you've just said, the importance of that.
Yeah, very important. So let's talk through how we're actually going to do these lips. Now, there's a few things that we always want to stick to, and that is that number one being, that we will always use the full length of the needle. And the reason we do that is we get maximum coverage with minimal trauma or minimal entry points. So we're going to consider the length of this pen the length of our needle when we're doing these injections, because the ratio is actually fairly similar in terms of what a needle would be on a real sized human lip. So what we're always going to look to do on the top lip and the bottom lip is have as much of a sharp angle as is possible. Now, by a sharp angle, I mean as vertical as possible. This would be considered a soft angle in this context, and this would be considered a sharp or steep angle. And we always want our angles to be as steep or sharp as possible in order to give maximum lift up on the top of the Cupid's bow. And you can always imagine this to be a little bit like a marquee. These are like the main areas of a marquee. And on a marquee, what they have is they have two tent poles here, and then they just peg out the outside. They don't actually have to fill up the entire thing with foam or anything like that. We're literally just creating support and structure with single injections, and that's what we're looking to do. We don't want to just flood the lip with fillers and plump it up. We want to create structure and definition to give a perfect heart-shaped lip. So what we're going to do first of all is mark up the apex of the Cupid's bow like we've got here, and the way we do that is by using a tiny little bleb of filler, which we'll show you in a later video on a live model. Once we've done that, you can quite literally hold the needle just below that in a vertical fashion and rotate it round until you can fit the full length of the needle from the wet dry board up all the way up to the apex of the Cupid's bow. So in the case of this pen, we're literally about here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to enter the lip at an angle, typically between sort of 30 and 45 degrees, and you're going to push in. Now, at this entry point, as the needle touches the skin, you're going to push and you're going to feel a slight pop as it passes through the epidermis and the dermis into the subcutaneous tissue. As soon as you've done that, and you want to do things nice and slow so it's very easy to control, as soon as you've made that pop and you've gone through the skin, sometimes you can literally see the skin release back up the needle. You then want to change your needle to flatten out, like we said here earlier, to be able to glide directly beneath the dermis. So as soon as we've made that entry, we felt the little pop, we've waited for the skin to release back up the needle, we change our angle so we're nice and flat, and then what we're going to do is we're going to push the needle all the way up to the apex of that Cupid's bow. We want to get right up underneath that apex of that Cupid's bow. Once we've done that, we're going to lift the needle ever so slightly, and we're going to just check that we're in the correct plane of the tissue space. And if you do that correctly, what you should see is a slight white blanching around the needle. If you can see the colour of the needle, the silver of the needle, you are too superficial, which means you need to back out, go a little bit deeper, and go back in again. If you push the needle in and you lift it and all you can see is this big chunk of skin over the needle and you're not really getting any different definition of the needle shape, then you're too deep. You need to come back out and be more superficial. It's extremely important. Now, when you lift the needle, you literally want to do it just for a second, nice and gently. And as soon as you've checked it, straight back down again. Do not keep the skin under tension as you're doing your retrograde linear thread. Now, what we're going to do at this point is exactly that. We're going to start injecting and we're going to do a retrograde linear thread. So retrograde means on the way out, and then obviously the linear thread that we've talked about in the earlier videos of how you can practice these injections. So on the way out, nice and flat, we're going to stop injecting just before the entrance hole to make sure that we don't get any superficial filler. And then we're going to bring the needle out of the skin nice and gently. And the amount that we're going to inject here, and it's the same on all injections, if we're doing a 1.1 milliliter lip enhancement, is 1 bar, or for those of you that prefer to refer to it in its correct format, it's 0.1 milliliters. Okay? Now what we're then going to do is from that point, we're going to move down the lip, and this does vary depending on the size of the lip, but you're going to typically come around about 3/4 of a centimetre to a centimetre, and we're going to go through the same process again. So we're going to mark up, and then what we're going to do is hold our needle vertically, and then we're going to rotate it round until we can fit the full needle length into the lip in order to have the steepest angle possible. So our entry point is about here. We're going to go in at about 30 to 45 degrees, break the skin, wait for that pop, always wait for that pop. If you don't, what you can do, if we say this is the epidermis and this is the dermis, you can actually go between the two or even into the dermis, and that is very painful.
Yeah.
You must wait for that pop before you do your injection.
And sorry, Adam, just to interrupt very quickly. The better your stretch, the easier it is to pop, as well as it's much less painful for your client. So when Adam is actually talking through the lip demonstration on both sides, when you're actually doing it on a client, which you will see in another video of myself and Adam doing that, we're constantly stretching, and we do nice, strong stretches to really ease the pain throughout this whole treatment.
Yeah, 100%. It's really, really important. Stretching is everything. Throughout all beauty and aesthetics, stretching is everything. It will cause them less pain and you'll get a better outcome
100%.
and maintain that stretch throughout the entire injection. So I've just replicated what we did on the first one over here, and now I'm just going to draw on exactly how we're going to do all of the others, and it's exactly the same as the reverse process.
And when Adam is marking up the blebs on each of these points, that is using such a minimal amount of product. Because that's a question we get asked quite frequently, isn't that wasting product? But it's absolutely not. You're using such a minimal amount, it probably wouldn't even be visible on the syringe,
No,
would it?
it wouldn't even register,
Yeah.
so there's no need to worry about that. So we'll go through the same process again. So we mark up the apex of our Cupid's bow, put the needle on, we rotate round until we can literally fit the entire length of the needle inside the mucosa without going into the wet and without coming out of here. So we're basically going to come down, stop injecting just before, and then come out. And again on this side we're going to inject 0.1 milliliters, 1 bar. And then we're going to do the same thing again here, full needle length, and we're going to do the same thing again. Sorry, it's getting difficult to draw over that side. So each one of these injections is going to be exactly the same amount, exactly in the same format, and all we're trying to do is create as much of a steep angle as possible with this needle to create as much support for these Cupid's bow peaks here as possible to lift them up. Now, what we will have done by this point is we will have used 0.4 milliliters or 4 bars as part of this lip enhancement in the top lip. Next up, we're going to move down to the bottom lip. Now what we want to do is we want to draw an imaginary line straight away down through the middle of the Cupid's bow. Sometimes this will match up to the septum in the nose, the central section of the nose here. And what we want to do is 3/4 or 2/3, somewhere in that kind of region, up from the bottom part of the lip, we want to make a mark. So let's say, for example, this is 3/4, this is probably about 2/3 here. What we want to do is create a mark somewhere in this region. It doesn't have to be precise, but essentially you want to be about 1/3 or 1/4 of the way down from the wet-dry border, and that's where your mark needs to go. And essentially we're going to go through the same process. So we can hold our needle straight on that point, and we can rotate it around until we can fit the full length of the needle inside the mucosa. So our entry point is going to be about here. What I don't want you to do is put the needle right through where the pink joins the white.
Yeah.
It's very important because that will hurt. You must come in just inside the pink, but I'm talking literally 1 or 2 millimeters inside the pink. You're going to come in at your angle, 30 to 45 degrees. You're going to wait for that pop. Once you've done that, you're going to push the needle all the way up under here, just subdermal. And on the way out, again, you're going to stop just early. And again, you're going to inject in here 0.1 milliliters or 1 bar, just here. What we're then going to do is we're just going to shuffle along again, usually about 3/4 centimetre to 1 centimetre. We're going to put our needle length in and we're going to rotate around again until we can fit our full needle length. We're going to insert our needle, push it all the way up, do our injection on the way out, stop injecting slightly shy of the hole so we don't get superficial filler. And again, we're going to inject 0.1 milliliters or 1 bar. We're going to come around the other side and we're basically going to do the same thing over here. Okay, we want to keep everything as symmetrical as possible. Our final injection is to try and create more drop on this bottom lip, to give nice drop on the bottom lip. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to do something called splitting the needle. So we want 50% of the needle on one side of the lip, 50% of the needle on the other side of the lip. We're going to make our entry point from either side, whatever side you feel more comfortable. We're going to go in, same technique, 30 to 45 degrees, wait for the pop, push the needle all the way along, so half of it's on one side, half of it's on the other, and then on the way out, we're going to inject 1 bar, 0.1 milliliters again. Now, once you've done that, that is your lip enhancement complete from an injection point of view. And down here, you will see that we've used 0.5 milliliters or 5 bars down in this bottom lip. So in total, we've used 0.9 milliliters or 9 bars, and typically left over we'd have 0.2 or 2 bars, which we may well have used when we were fixing asymmetry in the first place, or we may want to go around and just do some touching up after, which we can talk through when we get to the main actual lip model itself. But this is essentially your lip done. Once you've done this, you want to do your capillary refill timings. You then also want to do a full massage. You want to put some nice protective formula on, like Vaseline or some form of lip balm like that. Get it all nice and glossy, take your photos, and you're done. What I need to say to you now is that this part of the treatment is only really half of it. The other half is done in the massage, and it's extremely important. And as you step your way down through the expense of the product, so the cheaper products, for example, you need to massage those more than you do on the expensive products typically, although that is not always the case. So it's very, very important that you do the massage, and then the rest of the success rate of the treatment comes down to how they follow our aftercare instructions thereafter. But that is a theoretical walkthrough of exactly how you would do a lip enhancement and the exact amounts you put in, all of the angles and everything else. As the lip changes in terms of the shape of the lip, all you're going to do is you're just going to adjust your angles to match. So this is a higher lip with a bigger drop, so your angles are going to be ever so slightly more sharp than they would have done over there. But always you're going to end up with the same shape. And what I recommend that you do is grab a bit of paper, draw yourself loads and loads of different shaped lips, and just draw your lines onto that bit of paper exactly where your injections are going to go, and try and stick to some kind of ratio in terms of the needle length so you always get the correct angles in there. One last thing I'm going to tell you, a lot of people will say, oh, you've got a gap here, you've got a gap here. The reason we don't touch that area typically in 90% or more of lip enhancements is because what you can end up with there is what we would call a beak. As soon as you start adding volume to this area, it's already got a natural sort of drop on it already. What we don't want to do is add to that, and you don't need to, because all we really need to do is hoik up these posts, get this as high as possible, do the same down here, get the drop as nice as possible, and that way what we're going to end up with, hopefully,
the love heart lip
is what we would sort of call a nice big love heart lip, and that's what we're kind of aiming for. But we'll see you in the next module. We're not far off now injecting on our live models, so we'll see you then.